Marcus Hayes always has an opinion. Always enjoy having him jump on the air for a couple of moments. Does a great job covering Philly sports, Philly.com. Good follow on Twitter as well. And like he said on Twitter, he what else is going on, right? So I'll tell you what's going on. We got to have Marcus on for a couple of moments. How you been, pal?
Good, Richie. How are you, man?
I'm doing well. It's a long time. I'm glad to chit chat again. It's funny because I thought on a day like today we'd have a little fun, be a little more loosey goosey. You got the comments from Grow, and then you got the Markelle Fultz situation, only in Philadelphia. What's more bizarre to you, the Fultz situation or a coordinator basically coming out and basically saying, I don't know what the hell I'm doing?
Yeah. Well, I covered Dana Bible back in the late 90s. So if people don't remember Dana, he's the guy that replaced John Gruden.
Yep.
And that was kind of the beginning of the end for Ray Rhodes when Gruden left in the late 90s. So that was weird. He was replaced, I think, the middle of his first season by Bill Musgrave, who began the year as a quarterback in the Carolina Panthers camp, if I'm not mistaken. So it was a wild. So Mike Groh admitting that only nepotism ever got him a career in the NFL is a little bit less bizarre than the first overall pick from 2 years ago, effectively going on strike.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Let's stick with the Eagles for a second. We'll close out with the Sixers. It's so, it's so hard to get back and repeat. And I think there were so many expectations, and Doug said this is the new norm, and they enjoyed it. And at the end of the day, sometimes when you win the championship and you grind it, you get a little lazy afterwards. You get a little fat. You get a little complacent. It happens. The injuries, the line, Carson Wentz, the slow starting out of the gate in the first quarter, the defense, shoddy tackling, not opportunistic when it comes to getting turnovers. I mean, all that stuff kind of just manifests itself. I mean, the narrative that Doug is really missing Frank Reich and John DeFilippo. First of all, what's your thoughts on that? Is that overblown? Is it right where it is? Or is that an over-exaggeration? Or no, this guy really misses those two?
Well, back in August, my boss, Gary Petoskey, asked me to write a column about, what's going on, with anything I wanted to write about with the Eagles. And I was really taken aback. I was like, I can write anything? He's like, yeah. I said, well, obviously the biggest issue is Frank Reich and John DeFilippo leaving. And that was before they played a preseason game. So, yeah, it's to me, it just seems obvious and unavoidable. I mean, it happens to Belichick. When he loses his best coordinators, he's generally less of a coach next year. I mean, those guys do all the heavy lifting. I don't care who calls the plays. When you lose two minds like that, it hurts. It hurt him for a long time in the mid-2000s, or the late 2000s, if you remember, that he lost his, two best coordinators. So that's not unusual. What is unusual is to hire somebody so grossly unqualified as Mike Groh, essentially, who would not be a coach in the NCAAs or the NFL if his dad wasn't named Al Groh, maybe one of the five worst coaches in the history of the NFL, who also happened to coach the Jets, I believe. So that gives them two of the five worst coaches in the history of the NFL, because we know Richie Kotite went there next. So, yeah, I mean, it is what it is. That's going to happen. And when Doug said the new norm, I believe Frank Reich still hadn't been hired as the Indianapolis Colts head coach. If you remember, that was a weird thing with Josh McDaniels backing out. So the Patriots understood how important it was to keep a brilliant mind like Josh McDaniels in-house, and paid him something like probably $2.5 million a year, probably for 8 or 10 years, guaranteeing him the successorship to Bill Belichick. So yeah, to me it's not close. That, and the offensive line isn't playing very well. It's banged up. The entire team revolves around the offensive line. The offensive line sets up the run and the pass. Carson needs a good offensive line. The defense is built to play from ahead. So everything depends on the offensive line being healthy and playing well, and they haven't. And to me, that's the reason they're not 6-4 as opposed to 4-6, and that's a huge reason why they're not 8-2. as opposed to 4 and 6.
Listen, Marcus, we know everything goes hand in hand. When you have that line and there's pass blocking and run protection, you run the football, it open things up. We saw they were able to do that last year. I understand they don't have a legit workhorse type of back and Ajayi with the injury, and you've got to kind of basically shuffle these guys around. But what about the reluctance of Doug to just not want to at least stick with the run a little bit? I know it's difficult when you're on the road and you blink and you're down 17-0 or 17-3, but I just think at times they could try to at least keep a defense honest and then maybe try to open it up a little more.
Well, no. I mean, they just are what they are. I don't think that this offensive line and these running backs are equipped to set that tone. I just don't think so.
Okay, that's a fair point. So then I guess going forward, you got a game against the Giants. The Giants secondary, you can move the ball. They don't have snacks. The run defense, we saw Tampa Bay. I mean, I would think, again, Sunday would be maybe that game where they want to try to establish it a little bit, or do you think this is a game where they're just going to put it right on the arm and the shoulders of Carson Wentz and just go out and make some plays and try to win this game for us?
Yeah, I don't think that they're built to do anything else. Honestly, I don't think that their offensive line – and one of the things that they miss, very, very much are their second and third tight end. Dallas Goedert is a terrifically awful blocking tight end. Just god-awful.
I know.
I know. And Brent Selleck was pretty bad for Brent Selleck last year, but Brent Selleck right now, coming off the street, would be better than either Dallas or Zach Ertz. It's a huge deal in this offense. And it has been for years. That's kind of the unwritten story about how they lost their sixth offensive lineman. So I don't know. I don't think they can impose their will. And Brent was beat down. Brent was worn out, but he knew where to be, and he kept his balance. And you at least had to get around him. And I know that those things sound pretty damning and pretty elementary, but I'm not so sure either of the other two tight ends can do that at this point.
Yeah, we know the one thing, Ertz typically feast among the Giants. The Giants have horrible coverage against tight ends, so there might be some opportunities there. I want to go back to something you said about Doug. I've been getting the calls, and guys are chiming in that their fear, some of the fan base's fear is, okay, this is really who Doug is. I mean, is that a legitimate concern?
Yeah, it's a legitimate concern, but it's also who Bill Belichick was. Belichick has never had to face the kind of injury issues in successive years that Doug has had to face. Belichick has never had one position decimated the way that the Eagles' defensive back position was decimated and was green and thin to begin with. And that Doug doesn't buy the groceries, so I'm not sure you can put that on him. And Jim Schwartz asks his defensive backs to make plays once the quarterback is pressured and hit and moves off the spot. Again, Doug doesn't coach a defense.
Nope.
And Hali Nagata, if that's the correct pronunciation, he's not the answer. Michael Bennett's been pretty good. Chris Long has been absent. Brandon Graham was hurt. And, the other thing is the number one pick from last year, the first-round pick, Derek Barnett has been hurt for the last 4 games.
And the linebackers haven't played as well. I mean, Nigel, listen, great year last year. The linebackers have not really played as well. And they're not getting the turnovers, as we alluded to.
Great year last year behind a really elite defensive line.
Yeah, that's a fair point. That's a fair point.
That's the thing. You look at all the resources they spent. You go down that defensive line and offensive line and look at the money and the draft picks they spent on the offensive line and the defensive line. They have the second highest paid center, 2 of the top 5 highest paid tackles on offense. They have one of the top 10 highest paid guards at right guard and Brandon Brooks on offense. Then you flip over, you've got a first-round $100 million defensive tackle. You got a first-round $10 million defensive end on one side. You got a first-round, it's probably $5 million defensive end on the other side who's not playing. I mean, there's a lot that those two units have to be your best units, and they're not.
Yeah.
Well, and even if they are, the team is so eroded at this point. Even ordinary play by them makes the rest of the team that much worse.
Listen, I just don't think they're going to have enough firepower to finish out the year. I mean, you look at the NFC East. The NFC East stinks. We know that. Smith goes down in Washington. Dallas gets a couple big wins. The Giants stink. But still, even if they were to find a way to creep in at 8-8, I can't see this team. Last year, lightning in a bottle. They earned it. Everything fell into place, and they wrote it out. And you can never take anything away from what transpired last year.
Rich, I don't think that that's fair. Honestly, I think that they were the best team in the
NFC
no doubt.
doubt.
Best team at the NFL. I don't think it was
But,
lightning in a bottle.
well, hold on.
I think it was a concerted. I think there was a good staff and a really good roster, and they did a lot of things right. And had they not been so injured and lost their two coaches, they probably would be the favorite to win the NFC East and maybe even win a playoff game.
Let me ask you a question. Do you think they could have beat the Saints?
Do I think they could have beaten the Saints last year?
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Listen,
I mean,
13-3, it was a heck of a season. No, I know what you're saying by the lightning in a bottle comment. I know.
No, the reason I say about the Saints is the Saints lost to the Vikings, and yes, it was a miracle, but the Vikings should have never been that close for the miracle to happen if the Saints are, or if the Saints were what they kind of are now. What I'm saying, what I'm saying?
I know what you're saying.
And if you remember, like the Phillies, when they made their run, they didn't have to face the Angels, I think it was that year. They didn't have to face I don't think they had to face the Yankees, and the Angels were really good, and they didn't have to face somebody in the National League who was really good as well. But you can't fault them for it.
Oh, no. You can't. You got to play who's on your schedule. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, they didn't face the Saints, and there were teams that were maybe even a better matchup, but that team, their offensive and defensive lines were playing at such a high level at that point last year. I just really thought, I think after the win in Carolina, I wrote that they were the best team in the NFC, and then they proved me, right down the stretch. And they even absorbed the loss of Carson Wentz. It was really amazing.
No, you're right. And listen, you can't take anything away. And I go back, and I think the whole season last year turned on the Elliott field goal. I mean, that was kind of the catalyst where that was the turning point of the season. And they were going out. And I remember, too, after that Giant game, right, they ran the ball against Los Angeles. Blunt had a $136. They blew out Arizona. They took care of Carolina. And then they really started to just destroy teams. So you're right. I mean, from start to finish, they were the best team last year in the NFL, and deservingly so. All right, I got you for a couple more minutes. What do you make of the Fultz situation? Let me tell you, this is what I think. I don't like to say guys are head cases or they got mental issues. I think this kid's lacking confidence. I think he's got too many people whispering in his ear, and I just think the timing of this is really bizarre. Like, all of a sudden, they make the trade for Butler, your minutes decrease, you're coming off the bench, and now you got your handlers basically saying, oh, by the way, his shoulder's not 100%.
Yeah, he's badly advised. He's immature. He's probably got some mental issues, and he's ill-equipped to have the whole job at this point in his life. But that said, I mean, the organization does none of them any favors when they allowed Joel Embiid 2 years ago to call himself the process. At that point, the tail took control of the dog for good. Mm-hmm. If he can say that, if you remember, there was like this backlash, this backlash among the players from Dario Saric and T.J. McConnell, saying they were the Brotherhood or something like the Friends of whatever it was. But once you allow a player to brand himself above the team, then you're going to have problems. You saw it in San Antonio with Kawhi Leonard. Tim Duncan would have never done what Kawhi Leonard did. No. But I mean, you lie in the bed that you make, and the Sixers made themselves a terrible bed when they allowed, really, from Nerlens Noel coming in and trashing the apartment to Joel Embiid gaining 50 pounds while he was hurt. There's never been any real oversight from the day Sam Hinkie took over through the Colangelo debacle, and now when they really don't have a general manager who has any real authority. I mean, at this point, you can't have a player say, I'm going to see a specialist for an injury that the team says I don't have.
No, you can't. It's like you going up to your editor and say, you know what, I can't do any work. I don't have a laptop.
No, it's like my agent calling my agent telling my sources I will not be working anymore.
Yeah, that's true.
And then my sources telling my editor, Marcus says he's not going to work anymore.
Yeah. I mean, this kid's got no equity. He's got no equity in the. I mean, again, you. First of all, you can't strong arm someone when you've had a cup of coffee in the league. You can't do that. But at the end of the day, listen, I don't think the Sixers helped the kid out. The kid's not helping himself out. I think there's enough blame to go around. But how does this end? Because if you're Brown, you're thinking to yourself, what
you
the hell?
Remember Jaleel Okafor?
Yeah.
You remember Nerlens Noel?
But that's gonna.
That's how it ends.
That's
Nerlens
ugly.
Noel came out and said, "Hey, trade me. I'm upset. Trade me." Yeah. Trade you for what? Who are you? Who do you think you are? These guys have since they were 14, 15 years
entitlement.
old. They've had such skewed images of themselves because they've been the biggest fish in very small ponds, and then they'll get behind get in the camp of a Calipari or somebody like that, who again just tells them, "Hey, I need you for a year, and then you're going to be a star." And that's what they want to hear. You tell a 16, 17-year-old kid what he wants to hear, he's going to be your friend, but he ain't going to help the kid.
Do you think there's a scenario where they make I believe this maybe happen, and again, I'm just speculation, where you make the trade Butler, your minutes start to decrease, you know that you're lacking the confidence, they don't trust in you, you can't get a ton of run with the second team, and all of a sudden you turn around, you go to Brett Brown, come in my office, Markelle. Yeah, coach, I want more minutes. This is what I want. And all of a sudden, he's trying to dictate to Brown how it's going to play out. Brown's like, no, you're not ready. We haven't seen enough. We're just not ready to put you out on the floor, especially in crucial junctions during these games. And that's it. He walks away. All of a sudden, he makes a couple calls. His handler say, you know what? The heck with this. Now the ball's in our court. This is how we're going to do it. It's almost like I take my ball and I go home.
I don't know that that's the way it happened. I could see that happening, sure. But I think I don't think there was any conversation with Brett Brown from Markelle Fultz. I think Markelle Fultz agent called Markelle Fultz and said that's garbage, and we're gonna do what we can to get you out of this situation, or we're gonna do what we can to minimize the damage to your image. The only way Markelle Fultz can rehabilitate his image is by keeping his mouth shut and coming to work.
I agree.
And getting better.
I agree.
And doing what he needs to do. And if he does have a psychological issue, admitting to it and getting help for it. I mean, Brandon Brooks did it.
No, that's an excellent point. And he turned out to be a heck of a player. I mean,
Kevin Love did it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's almost fashionable. It used to be, what do you call it? It used to be
frowned upon. Yeah, sure.
Right.
Yeah.
But now, if you have mental health issues, and I guess fashionable isn't the correct word. It's a negative connotation, but it's certainly acceptable.
Yeah.
It's certainly fine to admit you have mental health issues. When you look at the numbers, look at the prescriptions written every day for people in the United States, dealing with mental health issues. So, yeah, I mean, it is what it is. If you're healthy, you're healthy. If you're not, you're not. But, either pretending you have a shoulder issue, hiding the shoulder issue, them lying to us about the shoulder issue, that benefits no one.
No. And we know the franchise, the organization as a whole over the last several years, the lack of transparency. And, you finally get a little clarity yesterday, and it catches the GM and the head coach off guard. Let me close with this. If we have this conversation, again, we're talking the Sixers in April. I don't even want to say where do you see Fultz. I mean, you think the hand's going to be forced where they're just going to have to you believe they're going to have to move on from this kid.
No, not necessarily. I mean, the kid, I thought he was making progress, quite frankly. I thought since Jimmy Butler got here, you saw progress from Markelle Fultz. Even that double clutch free throw, that's who he is.
Right.
And you have to work through that, whether you're hurt or whether it's mental. You have to work through that. But you have to display it. You have to become more aggressive. I thought Ben Simmons has become a more aggressive player from the perimeter after the acquisition of Jimmy Butler. And I thought Jimmy Butler could help both of them just with his presence and his demanding nature. And, I kind of see this as Markelle Fultz surrendering more than Markelle Fultz posturing.
Okay, that's a fair point. This is why we always like to get you on, because you have a good opinion. And you and I can go back and forth. So listen, real quick.
Yeah.
You ever see Trading Places?
Oh, wonderful movie.
Okay.
Wonderful.
So every year at this time, I do my annual Jive Turkey of the Year awards. So if I were to ask you, Marcus Hayes, I knew you would get a kick out of that. Who would be, now this is on the spot now, right? You got to ad-lib a little bit. It's radio, right? Come on, we got a huge listening audience here. Who's your number one, who would be your number one Jive Sports Turkey of 2018? Right off the bat.
In Philadelphia?
Sure, you can give me Philadelphia.
Howie Roseman, yeah. Probably Howie Roseman and the roster that he compiled after compiling the previous roster and allowing Doug to hire Mike Rowe as the offensive coordinator. Those two, the defensive backs he put together, the roster he put together, and the Doug Pederson hiring of Mike Rowe, that to me falls at the feet of Howie Roseman. And, nothing's more important than winning a championship in Philadelphia or being competitive with the Eagles. So when you ask a question like that, like who's the most like, I'm not saying he did the worst job, but I think it resonates the most of anybody else. After doing the best job of his career last year with Joe Douglas and Andy Weidel, Howie Roseman's had a terrible year.
Wow, look at that. Marcus Hayes, pre-Thanksgiving, a little stuff in there, huh? All right, well, listen, you have a wonderful holiday. I always enjoy talking, pal. Appreciate it.
All right, Rich. Talk to you soon.
You got it. Marcus Hayes.